We want to welcome our guest, Mike McFadden, who drove in from the snowy confines of Camas County this morning. Uh, I think he brought the snowcat with him. It's 7 minutes after 8 o'clock, and it's 40. Steve Millington, of course, is sticking around, too. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and we want to thank you for joining us. And if you recall, Mike has been with us before. He has a background in training people when it comes to firearm safety, and in fact, I think even people in the military at one time.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back.
Thank you, and good morning, gentlemen. To say it was a snowy trip in here is quite the understatement.
Did you come over the mountain to Gooding, or did you decide to go the highway?
We came through Gooding, and my day started early this morning. I know you get up early too, Bill, but I got up early and got the loader fired up and went out and cleared the driveway, which I've been doing 2 times a day every day for the past week.
Now, I don't want to wish you any bad luck, but in my opinion, it's a real good idea for you guys to have all of the snow up there in the mountains, and we will take the rain down here in the valleys.
Well, we've certainly got our share. Last I heard, it was like 120% of normal. And normally we'll keep praying for snow because the farmers need it. Now the farmers are going, all right, we've had enough. Who's ever praying, quit doing it.
And when the ski slopes start to close down because of the snow depth, that's an issue too.
And the schools. Today I have my beautiful wife with me today. I brought visual aids, which I realize probably doesn't have any place in radio. I brought my daughter Samantha, Megan too's friend of hers that's at my house more than I am, and my wife.
So we've got a full cadre of wonderful people from Camas County, Fairfield here this morning.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to talk a little bit about firearms and firearm safety because, Mike, you're actually somewhat of, I think I can say this, a contributor to our weekly gun program because of all the material you send me during the course of the show, and I tend to follow that. But you have had personal tragedy in your own family related to gun violence that took place at a school in California. And you've been developing a lot of safety ideas and products over the course of the years.
That's true. And I've been on the school safety commission there in Camas County for 6 years. We've lived there 7 years, and I've been on the commission for 6 years. And ironically enough, yes, last November 14th, 2017, my brother and his wife were shot in the last mass school shooting in California. And that really brought it home. That really brought it to the attention of what I'd been doing all along. Having, his wife was killed in that attack, and he's wounded and having a hard time recovering. Now, there was 14 wounded and 5 killed in that shooting, and we talk about that, 14 wounded, and they had that in the paper and they had it on the news, but it fails to really address how bad it was. And 2 of the people, after he had killed my sister-in-law and shot him, he went and shot them and took their car and blinded both of them in that attack. 2 young parents with young kids, and went on to shoot kids at the school. So, it's like I said, it's really drove it home. I'm very proud of where we live now in Camas County in Fairfield. I tell everyone we're not there by accident. When I retired in 2011, we had already started a year prior looking for a place to retire to raise our daughter Samantha, and who's a sophomore this year. And we looked from Georgia to Washington State, and we had a pretty good file put together, and my wife does a wonderful job doing this demographic searches and figuring out safe places and positive places to shop and whatnot. And believe it or not, what won out was Fairfield. I mean, we feel this is the safest place, the best place to raise our daughter in the United States. And we had interviewed people at the school prior to buying, and the sheriff, Dave Sanders, who we're just immensely proud of. Just an amazing individual, very sharp, techie guy. And I spent some time yesterday with him firing a new weapon that we have for school defense and for densely populated buildings in areas. And it's a non-lethal weapon that I can't talk a lot about, he said, because we don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but just phenomenal. I think it's going to change the way we protect our schools. And
well, question for you: Is it you mentioned this, but it's really a combination of things that we would put in place to harden the schools. I mean, it's got to be everything from better doors, better walls,
Certainly.
maybe somebody armed on the campus who's trained. There's got to be a mix of all these things together.
Well, when we talk about being armed on the campus, I bristle a little bit, and so do most of the sheriffs and the police that I deal with. The reason being is I've trained thousands of people. For instance, Urban Shield, which is a huge gathering of police officers from all over the world. I debuted my automated target system in 2015, and between 3,000 and 4,000 officers shot my weapons, shot my targets. And the one thing that everyone has in common, and that's police officers, I've trained U.S. Marine Corps. The one thing they all have in common is they miss a few times.
Mhm.
And I developed another device I refer to as the return fire, and it fires back at the shooter. It fires blanks, but they don't know that. And it's awesome when you first break it out because nobody expects for my targets to shoot back. And when we do that, when you have somebody that's under fire, they miss even more. And that's a problem in the schools. That's why I have a problem with arming people in the schools is every time that round leaves your barrel, you own that round. And you're going to miss a few rounds, and they're going to go through the wall and the next wall and maybe even the next wall. If you're shooting at a bad guy, it may even go through the bad guy and continue on. And I just can't imagine hitting one of the kids in the school when you're trying to do something heroic and you end up a few rounds miss, as they always will, and you own that round.
I want to mention just quickly Mike McFadden joining Steve Millington and I, Bill Colley in the studio, or should I say me? An old English teacher out there will be after me.
We don't need to worry about the English grammar this morning, Bill.
It's 40, and you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Some years ago, a developer, and I think it was in Salisbury, Maryland, came up with a shield that goes, it's a it's not thick really, but it goes against the school door, which means the door then becomes bulletproof. But someone can still shoot through a wall. You've brought this up before, and that's where people can be badly wounded or killed. We've got to find other ways to make that building a bit more impermeable to all of that.
And I agree. And the shooting that my brother was unfortunate enough to be involved in California, the guy that ended up shooting him was mad at his neighbor, went to the school to what he said he was going to go kill her kids. He never shot one of her kids, but he got others, and he did that by shooting through the walls. They had done a lockdown. That principal is literally a hero because the lady called the school and said, this guy's headed that way, and he locked down under fire and saved multitude of lives, I feel. But the rounds that went through the walls and through the doors, and that's a problem. We practice at our school. We've done active shooter practice with the sheriff's departments, and I was so impressed. My job was to go through and act out as an active shooter and try to find the soft spots or where they had problems. I couldn't find anyone. My wife, who works at the school in the cafeteria, I knew where they would be. Couldn't find them. I looked and looked and looked, and I was so impressed. I think we ended up finding two kids, and they just inadvertently had forgot to lock one door.
So I'm reading between the lines, and I'm kind of extrapolating your conversation. Proper training or additional training of school personnel and students will go a long way towards providing additional safety. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
You bet.
And how do we go about this training?
Well, there's a lot that goes into it. I have in front of me here. It's a program that our principal, Nathan Whittle, who's just an amazing guy. He's really new to our area. This is his first year as a principal, and he's actually moving up to the superintendent position. He brought with him a program called Watchdogs, and it stands for Dads of Great Students. And it's a male symbol, a male person that comes into the school and spends a day there with the students. And we went from, he was telling me, I think we had last school year over 100 incidents on the playground where there was either a fight or an altercation or something that would be reported to the principal. over 100. And now that we've started this program, they've had zero this year, zero reportables, and it's that male influence that I think is missing a lot. And great people doing it. They do background checks, of course, on all those people, but that one program takes the frustration level out that I think builds up. The other thing that's seldom talked about in these school shootings, and it's not available to us, is how many of these shooters are on some sort of medications. And as you guys know, there are all kinds of stuff that are issued nowadays, and it's their right, even though they went and shot up a school, it's their right to have that concealed from the public. So we don't know those stats, but I've got to think that plays an important part in why we're seeing so many of these nowadays.
When we build new schools, I mean, obviously in the future, when you're building something from the ground up, you can start to take into account a lot of the needs, security needs. It's the older buildings, and we do have, not far from where you live, I have some photographs. I did a photo essay of there's an old country school that has been closed down. You drive down Route 20. If you're going toward Arco, you hang a left, and this old school is about half a mile down this road, and I stopped there. It's been closed since the 50s. Old wooden schoolhouse. Somebody could put a few bullets through those walls, and they would go through the other walls on the other side. But a modern school, if you're building a brand new school, you can obviously, there's ways you can go about doing this to make it safer.
Yeah, and the problem is I heard somebody talking on your program last week about arming, if you have your concealed weapons permit or your enhanced permit, that you should be allowed to carry in the schools. And I have a problem with that because if it's not the proper rounds, like our sheriff's department where we live, literally the sheriff's department is 635 feet from the front door of the school. I mean, they're right there, and these guys are so well trained. These deputies I work with, I go out when they qualify, and they have shot my target systems, and it's phenomenal. One of them is actually my hunting guide. Guy's amazing shot, and the reaction time is quite fast there. That isn't typical in most schools. But to bring conventional rounds in and shoot that inside of a building, it'll go through a lot of stuff. It'll go through the walls.
And most interior walls are 2x4 with sheetrock on either side of them.
Right.
They're not.
Right, and no insulation even.
And,
Hold those thoughts.
And we are now up against a hard break.
We are. We've got more coming up. Mike McFadden and Steve Millington joining me in studio. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're 20 minutes after 8 o'clock on Magic Valley this morning. We have a couple of guests in the studio with us. One of them, Mike McFadden, is talking about gun safety. That happens to be in firearms training, and just we'll say all things gun happen to be your background, partial background.
Partial background. I did heavy marine construction. I retired in 2011. 33 years in the marine construction business, and I did about 11 years working for the Department of Defense. And I tell people, and they don't always believe me, so I carry pictures with me, but I installed magnetic silencing systems for Trident nuclear submarines. And then I went on to do design build for minesweep ranges and all kinds of fun stuff I can't talk about. But I just had the most amazing career.
I think what all we need to know is these stories that were written. One that comes to mind is The Hunt for Red October.
Yeah. And amazingly enough, that is so accurate. I've been on
Mike
submarines.
McFadden made all that stuff.
No. What we did, Department of Defense work I did, was ways to make the submarines harder to find. And in doing that, we figured out ways to make other things harder to find. And then we discovered we could find things. And
so it's a double-edged system.
When you're trying to hide stuff, and then you realize, wow, now I can find this, and I can't talk about it, of course, but it was phenomenal what we were able to see and do. And we went on to use it. I did a little work for a police department in our hometown where the shooting happened to be, as a matter of fact. And we used one of the systems to find a murder victim, a body. And while we were looking for that one, we found 3 others, and that was really disturbing.
I bet.
Yeah, so you be careful what you wish for, in other words.
Okay.
We've got about 24 minutes after 8 o'clock. It is 42, and I do want to mention, if you've got a comment or question for our guest, 208-736-0300, although I will tell you, we probably won't get to calls until after 8:30ish. We've got a lot still to cover, but I know Steve had brought this up. And every year there's a number of gun bills that get proposed in Idaho alone. The one you referenced earlier, there's a bill from a young man recently elected to the legislature, Chad Christensen, and that is to have people armed in schools. And as you said, you're not sure that that's the route to go. But any number of things that the legislature works on, and I know this is top of mind because this issue has become, we have to get a handle on it because if we don't, the other side is going to figure out a way to take away our firearms.
Yeah, and that's the problem. We're trying to figure out a way to solve these without taking away the rights of people that are law-abiding, do everything right, like myself. These new laws they come out with impact me, and I'm probably one of the better trained people at shooting and hitting targets, and I can't imagine that someday them coming in and taking away our weapons. I have a real problem with that. And it's a double-edged sword, like we're talking about the school. I have a vested interest with my daughter going to school, and I also sub at the school, and way more often than I want to probably. And I have to tell you a story. Last week was the first time I subbed as a PE teacher at the Camas County School. And I went into it, oh my gosh, this is going to be, and the PE teacher was sick that day, and I said, okay. And at first I said, oh gosh, no, I'm not going to do that. But I was plowing snow at the time, so I put the plow away and went to the school. It was absolutely the best day I've had since I moved to Idaho. It was phenomenal. The kids were phenomenal. And we started with kindergartners. Can you imagine doing a class with kindergartners for PE?
Well, that brings up a thought, and so let's push back a little discussion about legislative actions on school safety. In my hometown, and you talk a little bit about schools, and I was a long-term sub there for a while too, before I got full-time into radio. The police department was looking for a new location, and so the school had merged with another district, and my old high school became an elementary school as they built a new high school. So they had some extra space in that old building. The police department is now in the school building.
Wow.
Which means if you're looking for what you'd call a hard target, losing my voice here, but that would be it. And you referenced the fact that where your daughter goes to school, the sheriff's department's a few hundred feet away.
Yes.
At my old school, the police department is in a wing of the building.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so we can be creative and come up with these ideas if we need be.
Yeah, and we were also coming up, being that my whole career was spent figuring out solutions to problems. I mean, I got pulled in on jobs. We used to joke about it. I got pulled in on jobs where the cousin or the brother-in-law or something had taken the job and ran it completely in the ground, or they'd bid the blasted thing and had no idea how to do it. And that was a lot of the Department of Defense work. So I spent my whole career figuring out new ways to do things or figuring out ways to save companies from failing. And I'm taking that to the school now for this commission that I'm part of for safety at the school. And we've come up with some ideas that I think will help. There's really no way to 100%, I don't think, to end this. I mean, you just can't treat it like an airport. And people have asked me about that. Well, why don't you put up the metal detectors? Well, it would, by the time the last kid came through, the school would be done for the day. And that isn't a tangible solution. So we're trying to figure out ways to make it so we can mitigate the damage.
Yeah, I had an experience once subbing, trying to get a group of first graders to an assembly. So I can imagine what going through a metal detector would be like.
Oh my gosh.
Now, we've got about a minute before the next break, but with all the background you have, I'm a little surprised our legislature isn't bringing you in and chatting with you at the state level about potential solutions.
Oddly enough, the day you text me to come on the show, later that day I was contacted by one of our legislatures, Linda Hartigan. Yeah.
Linda Hartigan.
Yeah, she contacted me and she said,
she's on the House Education Committee, I think.
I'll be darned. Well, it was kind of ironic. And I asked her, I said, oh, you've been talking to Bill? And she said, no. And I said, well, I'm going to do this show for Bill. And so, yeah, I would love to go in there and do that. And I'm involved in some other projects. The lawyers told me I cannot talk about, absolutely cannot talk about it. I'm doing some major construction projects in our county and also in Elmore County. and so I'm a busy guy.
Well, we've got more coming up. Mike McFadden in the studio with us, along with Steve Millington today. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. We're at 40, 8:30, and telephone number if you'd like to reach us after the break, 208-736-0300. Mike McFadden joining us in the studio. You're going to be here till 9, right? I mean, I'm not delaying you.
Oh no, I had no idea how long this was going to go. So
Well, after driving through all that snow, you may as well stay for an hour.
yeah, then quite likely when I get home, I will have to walk in 1/3 of a mile to get to my loader to clear the driveway to get home.
We wanted to point out Steve Millington is joining us too with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. We're at 38. It's 8:34. And during our off-air conversation, a topic came up. Well, there's a number of people who ask you, why are we seeing more of these shootings? Of course, a lot of people have said there have been shootings. We just didn't have 24-hour cable news when I was a kid growing up, so we wouldn't have really paid much attention to a lot of these things going on. But then again, if you look at the numbers, I think they're still higher than they would have been 40, 50 years ago.
Well, the stats showing from 1891, that's April 9th, 1891 to February 14th, 2018, 1,062 shooters. That's the shooters, not the people being shot, of course. And that's and this is from Campus Safety. And that's something else when I went online to do a little research before I come in here, because I didn't want to have long periods of nothing to say.
That's not going to happen with this crowd.
Yeah.
Especially with Steve here.
Don't worry about that part. We got that one to cover
So I'm
for you.
looking at these stats, and oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. And it really depends on who's making up the stats. And I think somebody once said years ago that 93% of all stats are made up on the spot.
What would you like the number to be?
Yeah, it's really, and so I don't know this Campus Safety. In 1,062, they said shooters in private schools, 92 of those were private schools. Unknown schools, 33, and really don't know why they would be unknown. Colleges, 217.
At the colleges, 217.
217. High schools, 649. Middle schools, 154. Elementary, 140. And that's, like I said, from 1891 through 2018. By far, the highest number is high schools. And I think from working at the school and subbing, and they're frustrated. And my house is filled with high school students most of the time, my daughter's friends, and yeah, it's frustrating being around them. But we're trying to figure out why. So many people come up to me and say, why are we having so many shootings nowadays? And we're really trying to figure out why. I talked about Nathan Whittle starting this new program, having the men, dads of our great students. That program, hopefully that reduces the stress level a little bit. We don't know if it's caused by the drugs that are being given to our kids for ADD or whatever. It's not available. They will not make it available to us. And somebody could go in and shoot up like Parkland. We'll never know what that person was on. The guy that shot my brother and his wife, that information is not available.
Has it just been sealed by the court or by the police, or just flat not available?
Well, medical records, as you know, they just can't release medical records. And even though they've done this horrific thing, and we're trying to figure out why. And then people say, well, video games. I get a lot of that. Well, it's probably video games. And some of the things that this character did when he was going around and shooting up the school, this was Rancho Tehama shooting in California in 2017. He came back and to shoot the victim some more. And my sister-in-law, who was not dead at the time, he came back and hovered over her and finished her off. So it's kind of like the video games. It really paralleled what we're seeing. You get extra points for coming back.
We've got a caller. I'm going to squeeze a caller in before the next break. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning. I mean, you've covered a lot of area, and I personally am for doing anything to train people in the schools to make them safer. I'm also for training of people or staff or even retired military people to be counselors or whatever that are trained, not just a concealed carry permit. That is ridiculous. My son-in-law is a math teacher. He has a concealed carry permit. He says he wouldn't do it. So, it's a lot of stuff. But the question is, why is all this happening? And you're hitting on it right now. I mean, when I was a youngster, people had guns in their cars unlocked and didn't have a problem. And now it's a problem. It's society at large. Is it the pills? Well, I think it's because of what they have to take because of the pills. So what's going on there? It's our moral code that has been destroyed. It is a lot of stuff. I don't think any one of these things is one problem. It's a multitude of stuff that we've allowed to deteriorate in our country to the point that it's this way because we allow our government to change our diapers on a daily basis.
I want to thank the caller. We've got a short break. We'll have more on this in a response to Mike McFadden joining us in the studio along with Steve Millington and Bill Colley. It's coming up at 8:40. We're at 38 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Mike McFadden, our studio guest. He's along with me, Bill Colley, and Steve Millington with us too on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 42. And it's 8:41 on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Caller brought up the fact that a number of factors may be responsible for the spate of school shootings. And, of course, and you were talking earlier, there's a number of factors that go into keeping schools safe. If you could figure out the answers to all of the one group of factors, you could address the other group of factors. Not easily done.
There is one more thing that we haven't touched on, and I've been told for years now the number one driving force for all human beings is recognition. People will starve themselves to death for recognition. They will ignore everything for recognition. And that may be something we're doing more of nowadays. We post, as soon as there's a shooting, they do a whole background on the person and what they had for breakfast even, and they've made them famous. So is it the mindset that they're going, well, I'm going to go out in a bang and everyone's going to know me and I'm going to be famous? And that may play a part in it. In my brother's shooting, I had CNN and all the crazy networks beating on the hospital door. I went right to his side and I told them all no, because you guys just sensationalize the shooter and you forget about the victims. And we had one newspaper, the Record Searchlight in Reading, they came to me and they said, we will not do that. And there was no photographs. There was very little written in the newspaper about the shooter, and it was all about the victims. In the old days, I don't think we did that. In the old days, we called them evil people. The definition of the shooters was very harsh. And nowadays, you hear, oh, he was a troubled youth.
Well, we have desensitized the impact of the perpetrators and at the expenses of the victims.
Yes, sir.
And so the victims are the bad guys and the perpetrators, the perps. We cannot paint them with an ugly brush for fear of what the media or the social element is going to want to do back against us.
Well, we're reaping what we sow, basically. If that's what's really.
Well, I just I'm the village idiot. I live in a tent on the edge of the forest, but that I just wonder if we have reached the point where that the perpetrator is honored, and the victims, well, they were just in the way.
And yeah, it's a way to get famous, perhaps. And as an American, I've been saying this for years. As an American, I have a right to say, I don't believe in that. I have a right to say, I don't feel the same way you do about this subject, or what we used to say, we don't share your enthusiasm for this subject. When we were in California, my wife and I confronted with new school policies that you wouldn't believe here in Idaho.
Oh, I'll bet.
The stuff they were putting in the grammar schools, and we would say, well, we don't share your enthusiasm for this subject. And about the third time I said that, they realized I was saying, we don't like this.
We have a caller with us, and caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX with our guest, Mike McFadden.
Yes. has the subject ever been addressed? My wife has worked for health and welfare, and she's also been law enforcement. She's done 20 years of that type of work. And has anybody addressed the fact of we've got crack babies, cocaine babies, alcohol syndrome babies that are now reaching the age of our shooters in the schools? You know, we've got some real problems with our youth that are, I'm going to say, damaged. And does it just get shuffled under the rug?
Well, you know, I kind of feel that way. I think that we're not allowed to say that it's not acceptable. We're not allowed to say, well, that this particular student who's acting very bizarre, that's not acceptable. We're looking for all the red flags now. We're watching, we're being trained in these safety seminars at the school, what to look for. And you know, the stats say things like most school-associated violent deaths occur during transition times, so immediately before and after the school day and during lunch break. So we look at those stats so we know when we need to focus. And the other ones, violent deaths are more likely to occur at the start of each semester. And when we use those stats, we can focus. It's kind of like doing a profiling at the airport that's also not allowed. So we're trying to do a profiling thing and hopefully cut down the workload so we're not looking at all the students, but just the troubled ones.
Well, and you know, you used the word red flag. That's a bad word for a lot of our listeners. But if in its simplest term, it just means who's sending up, who might be dangerous.
Who's sending up a signal?
Right.
Yeah.
And so yesterday in New York, the governor, Andrew Cuomo, he was actually joined by Nancy Pelosi at a news conference where he signed a red flag bill. Take a listen to this.
So when the teacher sees there's a problem or a family member sees there's a problem and believes that a person could be a danger to themselves or others, they can go to a judge and say, "Judge, please do an evaluation." It is common sense.
Now, when I hear that, my initial response is, okay, you're addressing something, but you're not necessarily getting to the root cause, which the caller just brought up a couple of minutes ago. That root cause isn't going to go away.
And that's a fine line, you know. Is it somebody, is your neighbor's mad at you, for instance, and they file a report and they take your weapons away? And this particular shooter that shot my brother and his wife had his weapons taken away. He had violently threatened his neighbor, and they came and took his weapons away, and he went down immediately and bought parts and built more weapons. And there probably would have been more deaths in that shooting. He wasn't a real gun guy, so they didn't function well. But the fact of the matter is, they tried to do the right thing. They tried to keep this guy that obviously had mental problems and had threatened to do things. And so what do we do? How far do we go? Are we going to impede on my rights and your rights, and in hopes that we're going to stop the next shooting? And you know, this is going to take a lot more work before we get there. And I think just making a new bill and saying, okay, we're going to take away all the guns, we already know that doesn't work. I mean, that's ludicrous, because you take them away from the law-abiding people, and then there's no heroes to come to the rescue when there is bad stuff happening.
When we talk about Idaho, you referenced the proximity of the sheriff's department in Camas County to the school. On the other hand, in some of our counties, I was just reading yesterday where in Wyoming there is a county, and it's so far isolated that they're educating one student in one modular classroom because they're mandated to by law. He could go to another school, but in winter they can't get across the roads to go to the other school. And so you're in a situation, even in good weather, where there's a lot of distance between sometimes law enforcement and a school. But in this time of the weather that you're seeing in some parts of the state in the more mountainous regions, you're talking people might not get in there for a day. This has got to be a serious concern.
So that being said, we're looking at ways, and people are pushing this agenda to arm the teachers. And I'm, like I said earlier, I'm really against conventional weapons in the school because of collateral damage. And I have a vested interest with working at the school. I know all the kids, I know their names, they know mine. And the thought of going in there and having to address a shooter and possibly having collateral damage, having somebody shot, let alone my family members that are there, my daughter and my wife. So we're looking at new ways to take care of this. And I really think Dave Sanders, our sheriff, has come up with a real winning solution to this. And I will bring this up too if I get the opportunity in front of the legislature. And this is an amazing tool. This is just an amazing tool that I think should be used in most, if not all, of the schools.
Is it expensive?
It's about $1,100 for this particular item. So with grant money, we could put 2 or 3 of them in the schools, and
In each school building?
each school building. And there's semantics that'll have to be worked out. And I met with the principal yesterday, and I said, well, I'll build you locking cases. And boy, this is just another challenge. I can do that. I'll do automated this or that. And but amazing. It doesn't take a lot of training for this new device, and it will change the way we protect schools and any building where there's a lot of people, where there's high density events. It could be at a fair, and it's non-lethal and very effective.
And so what we're doing is we're kind of supplementing to some extent the firearms for a little bit more modern technology. Now, we're not eliminating firearms. This is supplementing firearms.
Yes, sir.
We've got a caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yes, you're talking about, you own the bullet. The bad guy owns the bullet. You need somebody to take care of that guy with owning the bullet. Yeah, bullet's going to go away, but the kind of people he's going to kill if you don't have another gun there.
You're absolutely right. However, as you probably already know, the lawyers don't always see it that way. And litigation literally drives everything we do in modern life. And they don't see it that way. When you fire, you're in there protecting all these young lives and all these people, and you accidentally, the bullet goes through the wall and hits a kid. I guarantee you are done. I had this discussion with a judge last week that was getting his concealed weapons permit. And I said, you do realize that if you ever draw that weapon and fire it, your career's done. They'll eat you alive. And that's sad. That's really sad we've gotten to that point. You do something very heroic. You do something to make a difference, and they're going to eat you alive. So we're trying to figure out new ways where we can go about this, non-lethal, but very effective new devices.
Another caller joining us. And caller, you're on the air with Mike McFadden, our guest on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. Excellent show. This topic here is one that is it kind of is a head scratcher. Personally, I believe that the reason why we see so many of these school shootings is because of our as a society, we've just wandered away from God and His influence in our lives. There was violence before in the Bible times. Cain killed Abel and he used a rock. Go down to southern Mexico, they use machetes. Wherever you get a person that separates from God, they're under this evil influence. But at the same time, I'm a realist. And I see that as a society, we need to do everything in our power to protect our children, which are the most precious of society. Quick story, I was in Oregon, and there was a fellow held up in his house holding his mom and his dad, threatening to kill him. Police showed up. After 12 hours of standoff, the guy started just going crazy, and the cops shot at him. 50 rounds they shot at this guy. One bullet hit him. So I agree with this Mr. McFadden that there has to be a way because, too many times you get people, they have their concealed carry. But when in the heat of the moment and you start shooting, not every bullet hits the target.
Well
and
said.
collateral damage. So I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea.
Well, it's definitely one of the problems of our era that we're trying to work on, and like I said, trying to figure out why. Um, cut them off at the pass before they even start shooting, and if we can find the commonalities that are causing this, then maybe we can reduce these numbers and we can make this a part of our history, a dark part of our history where it doesn't happen anymore. I don't think that's going to happen for quite some time unless we really address all these issues. Is it the drug thing? Is that part of it? Is it the making them famous? Is it just everyone's got their opinions and we're trying to figure it out? And as the more of these happen, the more stats they get, and the closer we can get to the truth. But it's a real tough learning curve.
For a lot of people listening this morning, and I know a lot of law enforcers who listen, and so you're working, I know at least with one sheriff's department. Are other sheriff's departments getting on board with this? Are you working with any others?
Well, I've been training. I started out training in California about 12 years ago. I built my first automated target systems and donated them to SWAT teams and police departments in California. And they were kind of my guinea pigs. And they were busy. They had a lot of use for this, and it was phenomenal. Like I said, at Urban Shield, for instance, I had over 3,000 officers shooting my target systems. We had a total of 100 points possible. The top shooter in California got 30 out of 100 points. And you talk about shooting under stress and under pressure. And it was a California High Patrol. We actually had shooters from police departments in South Korea there shooting my targets. And the interpreter was fun when things got real heated. He couldn't talk fast enough and do the interpretation fast enough. And some of the words were quite colorful, and we knew that. You could just tell. And we kind of guessed at what was going on.
So they kind of got excited.
Oh boy, to say they got excited. And this one event I went on for 3 days. And we noticed at 27 hours, now this is continuous, no sleep allowed. And around 27 hours, they really started making a lot of mistakes. At 30 hours, we called it sleep wasted because they would literally turn around with a loaded weapon and everybody's trying to grab the weapons away from these trained officers. And the idea was we wanted to see how they're going to react when it's really hitting the fan, something really bad's going on. Which officers can we count on that can function under this type of stress? Now, the return fire I talk about, that is always fun to do that because they don't expect it. And when it's shooting back, they get so nervous. The U.S. Marine Corps came back, and I can't repeat on this radio what they said. The first group that came back, and when we were deposing them, they used all kinds of colorful language because they'd never seen something shoot back. Now, I developed a target that jumps up out of the dirt, out of the sand. They literally walked over them and didn't see them. So we were able to jump up behind them with these targets, and it was a real hoot. And it was the first time in the history of the Marine Corps that we got to actually practice ambush training.
We've got to wrap things up, but stay in touch. We've got to pick this conversation up. I know we may see some some activity from the legislature and interest in this. Mike McFadden joining us in the studio and Steve Millington today. We've got a break, and one more hour of Magic Valley this morning is coming up following the news from Fox with Bill Colley.